Nintendo is making a Zelda movie? It's the LP Podcast. Nintendo is producing a Legend of Zelda live-action movie. Just recently announced this evening, November 7th, just before the recording of this. The film is going to be produced by Nintendo, of course, and Arad Productions, and directed by Wes Ball. This is something that Zelda, Nintendo, even greater video game fans have pined for forever. If you remember, just 20 years ago, there was an April Fool's video made that teased at a Legend of Zelda live-action movie. And now, it's a reality. Nintendo, obviously influenced by the success of the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which cannot be understated. The movie continues to do well, even selling physical copies to this date. However, one would have to imagine that the allure of a live-action Zelda movie is only going to outperform it, because one has to also imagine it's not going to compartmentalize itself solely in the youth market. Which, I mean, it could be argued that the Mario Bros. Movie is not necessarily targeted that way specifically, because there are a lot of nostalgic undertones to that movie, which definitely appeal to the older generations like myself. But a live-action movie with a franchise such as Zelda, what do we think that's going to look like? There's going to be violence. I mean, Link has a sword in every iteration. All right, I can't imagine that this movie is going to be rated E for everyone, or rather, to use movie terms, G, or even PG. I don't also think that it will be R. I think a nice PG-13 is probably going to be the case, but I guess on the off chance it is a PG, I could definitely see that working still too, because it's not like the Legend of Zelda franchise is inherently vulgar or for a mature audience, right? Like, you talk about games that even just came out this year, like Tears of the Kingdom, that's rated E for everyone, 10 plus. So I think that a case could be made for a PG Zelda, all right? But it's just hard to say with it being live action what the raters will end up making that, because the amount of violence in Tears of the Kingdom, or at least the amount of violence that I've imparted on the poor bokoblins, moblins, Lalfos of the world, it would definitely be closer to PG-13 than PG, but we will see. That being said, what do we know about the people that are working on it? Personally, I'm not a huge movie guy, so I don't know these names straight off the bat, but I do have their pages pulled up from IMDb. So the director, Wes Ball, what has he worked on? He's won awards twice. He won the Florida Film Festival in 2003 as the Best Student Film category for a work in progress. Then he also won another student awards in 2003 for the very same film. So that doesn't tell us a whole lot about what he's produced as a professional. So if we look down here, known for some of his most famous stuff, the Maze Runner series. Okay, so that offers us a little bit more information. If we filter out for art, looks like he's done a lot of art and a lot of visual effects in his career. It's kind of interesting sometimes to see where someone cuts their teeth, so to speak, whether that's from the writing side, the producer's side, or the effects side, like it looks like this individual was. In terms of director, he worked on 6 films. Of course, the aforementioned Maze Runner series, as well as Ruin, A Work in Progress, and Jacob the Movie. Not necessarily someone that has a ton of directing experience. That's interesting too, because it doesn't look like he's actually been the head director of anything since 2018, which was the last Maze Runner series. Now, I don't know about you, but I particularly fancy the Maze Runners to be better books than movies, but it does speak to his ability to translate something from one medium to the next, right? Working with video games, translating that into a film, probably not the easiest thing to do in the world. If we look at the things that he was involved in from an artistic perspective, I think that can also help kind of conceptualize what this might look like. So, as a visual effects artist, he worked with #Stuck, Telescope, Beginners, HBO as well, and a few other individual projects. In the art department, he was involved with the gag reel for Star Trek, a few Star Trek things actually, a good amount of Star Trek, as well as Aliens in the Attic. That's a good one. And in development projects are something that Zelda may be listed under, but I'm curious to see what he's actively working on. No, IMDb wants money. It looks like Planet of the Apes directing and writing credit. It's interesting to me that he does not show up, or his movies do not show up underneath that. Fascinating. If we pop on over to his Wikipedia, maybe we can get some more information there. Filmography. Yeah, his filmography is very light, so he is producing, he is directing specifically as well, the new Planet of the Apes movie. So that's a big 2024 Zelda. Probably not coming out in 2024, almost assuredly not. Probably not even 2025. It might be a 2026 sort of thing with it just now being announced. That being said, those are a big couple of projects that Wes Ball is getting himself involved in. So, not necessarily a huge tenure in the film industry. He's very much someone who seems to be just getting their start. So I don't necessarily know if that means it was just like a bargain sort of thing for Nintendo to, all right, this is the guy because he's not expensive, or because he's the guy that they interviewed and he has the right vision. Perhaps he's even a Zelda fan in his heart. And I think that's something that is honestly really important when translating a video game or any other art to film. You really need to like and love, more than anything, that specific IP. All right, we talk about the live-action Dragon Ball. That wasn't someone that loved it. But you talk about the live-action adaptation for One Piece for Netflix. It was pretty good. All right, you can tell that there is some care put into that, and I hope that the same amount of care is present in Wes Ball's adaptation of The Legend of Zelda. Looking at the studio, Arad Productions. Could be butchering it, I'm sorry. Again, not a huge film buff, so I don't necessarily have any level of familiarity with these names, but they are responsible, or at least partly responsible, for a number of immediately familiar titles. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse this year. Spider-Man Homecoming, but 6 years prior. Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse. Uncharted. Okay, here we go. Borderlands. Very good call. Ghost in the Shell. Metal Gear Solid. So we're looking at a company very well versed with adapting from medium to medium. Great partnership for Nintendo here, because obviously, yes, Spider-Man from comics to film, but Spider-Man's been adapted a million times over, right? This is not necessarily novel, but something like Uncharted, that was the one adaptation, and while it has a 6.3 rating on IMDb, I've heard very good things about it. So that is to be seen, but to be optimistic about as well. Borderlands, another video game adaptation, still yet coming in 2024, so be curious to see what is done with that. And then, of course, Ghost in the Shell, an adaptation. Metal Gear Solid, an adaptation as well. Bratz, I mean, that's an adaptation from Hideous Little Dolls, but that's an adaptation all the same. Clearly, they have a host of experience adapting not only animated mediums, but video game mediums. Pac-Man, One Punch Man, Airbound, Helldrivers, Ninja vs. Samurai, Pac-Man again, Pac-Man again, Pac-Man again, Pac-Man again, Pac-Man again, Pac-Man, 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 Pac-Man. Goodness sakes, how many Pac-Man movies are there? A whole host of them. But the key differentiator, of course, these are not live action, right? What would a live action Pac-Man even look like? It'd be horrifying. But the fact remains they have a ton of experience in the greater video game film space, and I think that is cause for Nintendo fans, Zelda fans, and anyone else who has any small semblance of nostalgia for either to be very optimistic. And that's probably the biggest news that anyone could ever hope for, not only today, not only for this week, conveniently enough, landing on the day of the podcast, but for the month. Nintendo continuing to stack W's on an already great 2023. You talk about Tears of the Kingdom, right? You talk about Mario Wonder coming out just recently. Then there's Super Mario RPG on the horizon. We've got WarioWare recently out, Pikmin 4, the whole Kit Kat caboodle. Nintendo is on a roll, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Let's look at the other headlines. Hello, and welcome back. It is Tuesday, which means it's another day of Nintendo news and opinions hosted by yours truly. We'll start with the quick hitters. Twitch is ending support for the Nintendo Switch. Yes, no longer is Twitch on Switch. As much as it rhymes, it would seem that Twitch doesn't necessarily find it valuable enough. I'm not certain as to why. No definitive answers have actually been given in this regard. but I'd have to imagine that it has something to do with the fact that Twitch is consistently seeing more and more competition spurred up. Certainly more competition than Twitch is used to seeing in the past, right? With services like Kick starting to take away users from Twitch. Twitch has even, as of 2 weeks ago, released their restriction on multi-streaming. So this is but two of many changes I expect to see from Twitch. Moving on, speaking of Twitch, Switch, and itches to scratch, the Nintendo Switch continues to scratch people's itches, clearing 132 million units sold as of this week. And that's especially interesting because that is getting close to the Nintendo DS, which sold over 150 million units. It's also, it's moved past, well past the 3DS, actually nearly doubling it. And for good reason, too. If you've played a Switch, and you probably have given these remarkable numbers, you know that it's an extraordinarily good console. It affords you the ability to play from home or on the go. Granted, I myself, I kind of prefer it on the screen. I think I can count the amount of times I've played my Switch on handheld mode, well, with one hand. Oh, but that aside, it's no secret that many people enjoy the Switch for a host of different reasons, from a host of different areas, and what's more, the games are selling well too. Tears of the Kingdom, over 20 million units sold, and even more recently than that, Pikmin 4 sold over 2.5 million units, which makes it the best-selling Pikmin game of all time. Which I'm glad to hear. You know, I had really hoped that would be the case when Pikmin 4 was announced. First and foremost, it was a long time coming. I had gray hairs on my head that were older than the last Pikmin game. But I wanted Pikmin 4 to do well as to hopefully, you know, convince Nintendo to continue to pour support and finances into the franchise. And I think that's going to be the case, especially now that we see that it's setting records. If Pikmin 4 had perhaps undersold Pikmin 3, then maybe they would be a little bit more apprehensive. But good things are coming, in my opinion. Moving on, we look more into the sales numbers here for the games. You can in fact see the hardware sales, the Switch, OLED, Nintendo Switch Lite, all broken down here on this graph, courtesy of TechRaptor. And they're doing well. Sure, there is some fluctuation, as you might expect, but by and large, the fact that the Switch has continued to sell so well for the last, goodness gracious, almost 10 years is nothing short of amazing. 19.5 million units for Tears of the Kingdom, 3.2 million units for Mario Kart 8 just in this last year, which is wild considering that that game itself is older than the Switch. Truly an impressive feat. Nintendo wins a ruling to end a patent lawsuit over Nintendo Switch controllers. If you hadn't heard about this, you may not be super familiar because I wasn't. It had seemingly gone swept under the radar. But Game Vice. Game Vice is a company that creates, well, game devices, and specifically the subject of this lawsuit was stating that Nintendo infringed upon Game Vice's proprietary invention, shall we say, of putting controllers on a phone. Very much how the Joy-Cons attach to a Switch. Now, sure, there are some similarities with that, and the concept itself is inherently akin to one another, but I don't necessarily know that that is grounds for a lawsuit. And it turns out that the judge agreed, striking down Game Vice's frivolous attempt at litigation. The first review for WarioWare Move It is in. This game released just under a week ago, last Friday, and reviews are good. As you can see here, receiving 9, 8, 9, 9, a total of 35 out of 40, which is just 1 point behind the most recent other release from Nintendo, Super Mario Bros. Wonder. If you're a fan of lightning-quick mini-games and quirky humor, WarioWare is probably right up your alley. It's a game that I want to play myself, but, you know, time is a finite resource. Moving on, Nintendo is continuing their good guy actions, sending Mario Kart and Switches to nursing homes in Japan. The tagline here, Nintendo wants to get Japan's eldest residents hooked on the Switch 2, is probably not wholly inaccurate. Being a company, they undoubtedly want to acquire as many customers and interest as they can, even with the population that is, well, dying. But I also like to believe in the good hearts of the people and that this is also just a good old-fashioned publicity stunt, which isn't inherently a bad thing, right? People can do, companies can do, individuals, entities can do good things with the idea that it would gain them some sort of notoriety for it. And perhaps that's what Nintendo's doing here. Certainly they got themselves into the news and onto this show as a result of this action. But I hope, in my heart of hearts, that my nursing home also has a Nintendo Switch, because if it doesn't, I'm bringing one. And a Wii, and a GameCube, and a Wii U too. So, moving on, Sega plans for Sonic the Hedgehog to win against Mario in popularity. Osamu Ohashi, the head of Sega's business division, believes that the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise can surpass the Mario series in popularity worldwide. Now, that's a bold move, Cotton. That's a bold statement. I mean, and of course, Sega wants Sonic the Hedgehog to surpass Mario, very much like I want, to grow 6 more inches and also find a bag of money under my bed. But it's not going to happen. Unfortunately for Sega, what they would need to happen prior to being able to surpass the franchise is to even start to compete with it, in my opinion. And sure, Sonic's been a mainstay in the gaming space and they continue to churn out games, but these games are by and large, well, how do I put this? Flawed. And I'm no supreme connoisseur of Sega IP, specifically Sonic. I'm a fan of what Sonic's done, but I haven't truthfully played a full Sonic game since the early 2000s with Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. So that alone should tell you almost how I view the franchise. And while my opinion alone is not the barometer of what a popular gaming franchise is, it should speak to you as a Mario fan. Well, what direction I'm steering? Definitely steering towards the red hat versus the blue rodent. You know what I'm saying? Either which way, I think that competition is good. So Osamu and the greater Sega business division having these high hopes and lofty dreams and ambitions is not a bad thing, right? Shoot for the stars, and if you miss, you'll die in the vacuum of space or something. I don't know. Whatever the saying is, you go for it, Sega. I wish you the best. Moving on, Nintendo Life polled their reader base for the 50 best Game Boy Color games of all time. And we're going to take a look at this list here in a moment, but I wanted to talk about briefly what I hope to see, maybe not at the top, but near the top. I grew up with the Game Boy Color. First and foremost, I had the original Game Boy, but that didn't last too terribly long before I eventually migrated onto my teal Game Boy Color. The Game Boy Color specific games that I remember loving the most were the Oracle games of Zelda, Seasons and Ages, and then also Pokemon Crystal. Now, I'm certain all of those 3 games are going to be ranked on this list in some capacity, and if I had my wish, they would be up in the top 10, which is where we're going to find our way here. In fact, actually, before we do that, we'll look at number 50, Mega Man Extreme. It's an interesting curio, but its ambitions exceed its abilities. As fantastic as portable Mega Man X game sounds on paper, in practice, Extreme is little more than a lesser imitation of the console originals. Truly, I mean, it almost sounds like a scathing dismissal. If anything, I mean, being ranked top 50 is nothing to shake a sneeze at, if you will. Moving down the list, we're going to have to skip forward a few pages to figure out where the top 5 is, but we'll start at the top 10 with Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. At the time, Super Mario Bros. Deluxe felt something a bit special. This handheld port offered not only a great version of the original game, but also packed in the lost levels, plus bespoke red coin collecting challenges and minigames to enjoy, which almost made up for the reduced view of the Mushroom Kingdom on the Game Boy Color's diminutive screen. I remember not owning this game, but I believe borrowing it for an extended period of time from a neighbor and then possibly forgetting to return it and then losing it. So, it's a good game. I mean, really, Mario, good. some things are always consistent in life, right? Death, taxes, and the aforementioned fact. So I don't expect that to be the last mention of Mario in the top 10. Oh, lo and behold, Mario Tennis by Nintendo and Camelot, January 2001. What's a Mario sports game without iconic characters such as Alex, Kate, and Harry? Camelot's handheld Mario sports entries were bizarre. Not only is Mario absent from this game until you unlock him in the story mode, but there's a story mode. Fascinating. This is not a game that I am well familiar with. It's interesting to me, too, that it's almost like a generic tennis game from the sounds of it until you eventually unlock Mario. If I were to get this game as a child, or even now, I'd perhaps be a little bit disappointed upon that revelation. Fascinating. Moving on, Metal Gear Solid at number 8, released by Konami on May 2000. Shifting the perspective from Solid's 3D back to the series' 1987 roots, it's incredible just how faithful this 8-bit portable Metal Gear Solid is to both the 2D games of the NES and later polygonal PlayStation entries in terms of gameplay, tone, and aesthetic. Again, not a game that I played. I mean, it was rated E for everyone, but Metal Gear games almost have a reputation for violence. In being a child at the time, my parents were keen on shielding me from any and all forms of violence that, of course, did not involve pitting little pocket monsters in fictionalized cockfights against one another. Number 7, Wario Land 3. Great game, released on the 30th of May, 2000. Like Wario Land 2 before it, Wario Land 3 is in some ways more of a puzzle game than an action game, and it's essential to know going in that it's very different from a standard Mario platformer. Truly, if you've never played a Wario Land game, they have a quirk and charm all their own, and while they do maintain sort of the Mario universe feel, for lack of a better phrase, they definitely have their own quirks and fun little gimmicks, for lack of a better term, that I think are worth exploring. Good placing here at number 7. Number 6, Wario Land 2, for very much the same reason. Number 5, Pokemon Crystal. Look at that. One of the games I'd hope would be in the top 5 is indeed up there. Pokemon Crystal is the perfect swan song to what many fans consider the best generation of Pokemon games and the series' final Game Boy Color entry. That's a bold phrase already there. The best generation of Pokemon games. You know what? Gen 2 is a great generation, but I have to, I think I would put Gen 3 slightly above it, but that's not a topic for here and now. What is a topic for here is the fact that Crystal absolutely deserves a place in the top 5. Pokemon Gold and Silver. Okay, I was trying to rack my brain as to whether or not Gold and Silver were part of the Game Boy Color or the Game Boy, because I was thinking about the shape of the cartridge, and I have them over here behind me on my desk or on my shelf. But the shape of the cartridge, if I remember correctly, is shaped like the original Game Boy cartridges. Either which way, clearly I was incorrect. Pokemon Gold and Silver have always been a highlight in the Pokemon series, and even now, decades since they were originally released, they remain a truly brilliant experience. Very much the same as Pokemon Crystal. While there are a few differences, they are very much the same generation, and up here for the same reasons. Look at this. Number 3, Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons. Now, this has to mean that they're differentiating between the two, and of course, they are two different adventures, but I would kind of lump them in together in the same ranking, because pitting them against each other in this way is problematic at best and offensive at worst. You see, because already I can tell you here that I would put Oracle of Seasons above Oracle of Ages. Now, yes, that may be because I like the color red, but I also like Din. You know, so hey, well, I guess it's entirely subjective. If you're looking for a straightforward Zelda adventure, this battle-heavy quest is about as straightforward as it gets. Oracle of Seasons put combat center stage, but adds in enough originality to keep it from feeling monotonous. Absolutely true. And then number 2, the aforementioned Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages, manages to feel both new and familiar at the same time. Link wields the Harp of Ages, which you could use to travel through time. Now, he may have already done some time traveling with his ocarina, but in Oracle of Seasons' companion piece, it becomes the central aspect of gameplay, primarily used to solve puzzles by moving a stone in the past to redirect the flow of water in the future, for example, or planting seeds that will grow into trees and vines. That is an interesting comparison they touched on, and perhaps that is why I remember them that way, with Seasons being higher up in my, say, mental ranking. Probably because, especially as a child, when I first played these, I was just so gosh darn gung-ho on combat, particularly with the swinging of the sword by Link himself. And number 1, Link's Awakening DX. Look at this. We got top 3, all Zelda. I didn't even think of Link's Awakening DX since it is, well, the DX version. Link's Awakening is a game of contrast, sadness and joy, bleakness and whimsy, dream and reality, confusion and comfort. Its success lies in its ability to balance these contradictory elements with tight, compelling gameplay and a timeless presentation. The extra dungeon and other features of this DX version don't add up a huge amount over the original monochromatic release, but it's still a mighty fine game enhanced by the upgraded console's color palette. Truly, I mean, you can't go wrong, right? Especially with the top 5 being all Zelda Pokemon, the top 10 essentially being Zelda, Pokemon, and Mario. Could you have expected anything else? Metal Gear Solid bringing out the lone differentiator in that top 10, and then I suppose Mario Tennis being the lone sports game, it deserves some praise as well. But Nintendo knows what it's about. Always has, presumably always will, and I think that's the reason why we as fans enjoy Nintendo, right? Nintendo does a lot of things well. Nintendo tends to stick in their lane and produce things all the same. That being said, Nintendo is not without mistakes. And I mean, we've all made them, right? Goodness gracious, I put half as much creamer in my coffee before this as I should have. And lo and behold, I'm not drinking as much, but I am still enjoying it. What are some of Nintendo's biggest mistakes? It's an interesting question that I wanted to pose to myself here, and being the professional podcaster I am, didn't do any real planning for this segment. I just knew this wanted to be the question I wanted to ask. So when you think of mistakes Nintendo has made, off the top of my bat, I think of the sale of Rare to Microsoft in the early 2000s. It's hard to say whether or not that's just a mistake or a missed opportunity, which I suppose is the actual title of the segment. So it's probably fair here. When Nintendo sold Rare to Microsoft, you kind of lost the ability to hope for anything Banjo-Kazooie related in the future. I have to believe that if Nintendo would have held on to Rare, or if something would have happened there to where Microsoft did not take sole ownership of it and therefore kind of kill the franchise, that you could have gotten a lot more out of it. Shoot, you may have even had a Donkey Kong 64 sequel, which was also produced by Rare. And then you talk about things like Conker's Bad Fur Day, and there were a lot of missed opportunity into that transaction. I'd be very curious to hear what you think, what you would have hoped for elsewise. Another missed opportunity, perhaps, was Nintendo's opportunity to work with Sony on the PlayStation. Yes, I don't know if this is a well-known fact, but in the early 90s, there were talks between the two companies to co-develop this platform. I'm not necessarily certain what that would have looked like. In fact, that going through, in my opinion, would have completely changed the landscape of gaming as we know it today, which is essentially... it's like a, not, I don't know if a 3-horse race is the right way to put it. You know what I'm saying? Because Nintendo, as I just said moments ago, stays in their own lane. They do their thing, produce their games with their own specific charm, right? And then you have Sony and Microsoft, who are almost like consistently competing, but they're competing on sports titles, on first-person shooters, on some of the more aggressive action-adventure games as well. And then you throw PC in there, which is inherently, I suppose, Microsoft adjacent. And I'm not necessarily certain what that would have looked like with Sony and Nintendo collaborating way back when, right? Let's hypothesize for a moment. What would that be? Say that they did that venture together. It went so remarkably well that they continued to work together. Would that mean less Nintendo as we know it today? Would that mean less Sony as we know it today in the terms of the gaming space? Either which way, I'd have to imagine it, one, means less competition. Two, it could have meant that Sega stuck around after the Dreamcast. I was a big fan of the Dreamcast, and honestly, I wish that there were currently 4 players, but these things happen, right? Ultimately in a capitalist economy, the cream, so to speak, rises to the top and buys everyone out. And then, hey, where's the competition? I don't know. It's dead. So either which way, those are probably the two biggest missed opportunities, maybe just from a financial perspective for the Sony and Nintendo thing. And then just from a fanboy perspective on the Rare thing, I really feel like that could have been a boon, to be honest with you. And I still have hope for it. I may have mentioned it before, but I would love for some wealthy benefactor, some fanboy to win the lottery and then buy the rights to Rare and give it to Nintendo, or do something with it. And with Banjo-Kazooie, like, goodness gracious, that would be, well, to put it bluntly, that would be a pipe dream more than anything at all. But it would be a dream all the same. What do you think? What are some of Nintendo's biggest missed opportunities? I'm sure there are plenty that I didn't speak about. Honestly, anything at all could be considered a missed opportunity, whether that just be the choice in a release date, the choice in a direction of a game. I know some people consider Breath of the Wild to be a missed opportunity. Interestingly enough, they consider the swap over from traditional, action adventure dungeon crawling nature of Zelda games of the past into the open world boon, in my opinion. That is Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. They consider that to be a missed opportunity. So it's going to be entirely subjective. There are no right or wrong answers. There's only conversation, and there's only that happening in the world of news and opinions for Nintendo today. So thank you so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, or listening for that matter, whether you're on Spotify or YouTube, and I hope that you enjoyed yourself. This is a weekly thing, so all you see again, exactly, and unscripted too, so you're going to say things like that. Oh, but I will see you again next Tuesday for next week's news and opinions.